The story or stories you are about to hear are to entertain. The writers of these stories may claim they are true, yet they may not be. That is up to you to decide. After all, this world is a strange one. What can you even do when the most horrifying paintings you've ever seen haunt you for the rest of your life? Well, we have that story and more in today's episode. From disturbing paintings to demons and ghosts galore, you'll find something to love and fear in this episode. Enjoy these stories and be sure to send me your own so I can narrate it. Just go to darkstories.org. Now, let's begin. The Paintings from MysticMutic. I used to work for a real estate company where I'd survey locations to see whether or not they were worth flipping. Basically, I spent my days in abandoned buildings, more than anyone should. It was a good thing my teenage years were occupied by some light urban exploration. While most times I went to these locations with one of my coworkers, a burly man named Sam, but there were a handful of times when I'd be sent out on my own. This instance ended up being one such solo trip. It had snowed the previous night, and while it was shoveled or melted off the main walkways, there was still enough of it to be troublesome. Sam and I were supposed to meet at the house, but he had texted me during the drive, saying something about how his kid was sick, and he couldn't make it. "If anything goes wrong, call me," he'd ended the message with. I sighed. Sure, it was understandable, but I hated going into such broken down places on my own. It just seemed too dangerous for my taste. At least, for my adult taste. Even with the ease that I opened the door, it was apparently enough force to nearly tear it from its hinges. With a glance at the rusted hinges, I made a few notes in my book before stepping inside. I closed the door behind me in an effort to keep out as much of the cold as I could. The interior was in better shape than I imagined, with furniture tossed about rather than the structural damage I was anticipating. The first floor checked out and was better than I imagined. A few strokes of the pen and I moved on to check upstairs. With a huff, I picked up one of the fallen shelves that had blocked the stairs. Crap, I thought aloud, looking at the holes that all but littered the steps. With cautious footsteps, as though walking on a tightrope, I eased up the stairs, hoping to make it to the second floor in one piece. This floor was where the bedrooms and bathroom were located, but it didn't look anything like the first. Where the first had been just a bit out of sorts, the second looked to have suffered through a storm. The walls were torn and hole-ridden. Torn mattresses were thrown against walls or onto the floor, and the floorboards looked dangerous. Though I tried to keep my footsteps on the solid-looking floorboards, one gave way and a sharp pain jolted through my foot, which was burrowed into the wood. My boots ensured the wood hadn't scraped against my foot, but the pain wasn't leaving anytime soon. Even before I pulled it out, I knew my pants were not so lucky. The fabric by the ankle had been turned to Swiss cheese, and I cursed. One hand reached toward the nearby doorframe, as the other searched for anything else to gain some leverage and pull my foot out. I found a string that seemed to lead up to an attic space and decided that that would work well enough. With both hands gripping these objects, I pulled down and thrusted my leg upward. There was a sudden rush of pain, but I was able to free myself. But it was with this motion that the ladder-like staircase was pulled down, and I went crashing to the floor. It was nothing short of a miracle that I didn't fall through those floorboards and land somewhere in the living room below. I jumped to my feet and dusted myself off, all the while cursing up a storm. Finally, I looked up. To my surprise, these pull-down stairs were the most well-kept thing in the house, and they looked brand new. Curiosity overwhelmed me. I sent a quick message to James, telling him the place was a dump, but I was checking the attic now. Maybe because I wanted to make sure that if anything happened, Sam would realize and get me out of there. Shaking off the pain in my foot, I tested the first few steps and the rails that bordered them. Convinced they were safe enough, I made a slow ascent. The only sliver of light came from the breaks in the wood planks that covered the window. It wasn't enough to properly maneuver, so I pulled out my flashlight, and I nearly leapt back down the steps when I turned it on. The space was cluttered with images of people, all different subjects and different mediums. There were paintings over there, pictures along the wall, Polaroids hanging from the ceiling. All of very different people with one thing in common. None of them looked normal. There was a distorted aspect about each of them. Gangly limbs, jagged teeth and mouths much too wide, eyes too far apart, too animalistic. Skin shades of green or yellow that only came with sickness, bodies set at impossible bone-shattering angles, an array of indents into the skin as though hands had squeezed the flesh. Something was wrong about each picture, and the longer I stared, the harder my stomach lurched upward. I'd seen some weird things in my time, but nothing so gut-wrenching as those images. I clambered back down the steps, with no regard for safety or caution, causing the true instability of such new-looking steps to make itself known. My already injured foot broke through one of the rails, and I lost my balance before I was even halfway down. While I remember tumbling downward, I don't remember hitting those sketchy floorboards, but nobody really remembers passing out. They just remember waking up in a strange position at a time of day they don't remember venturing out into, or another space entirely. Next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of Sam calling out to me from the entrance. Turns out I'd fallen through those darned floorboards and had broken a few bones in the process. I also sustained a concussion, which may have been what knocked me out in the first place. Good thing it had too, as all that pain would have been a fresh kind of hell. All because of a room filled with creepy paintings. Speaking of those paintings, there wasn't any trace of the attic I claimed to have climbed up into. By the time Sam had arrived with the police, the stairs were nowhere to be found, and unlike myself, he wasn't about to go exploring. The ratty old building was condemned and eventually knocked down, replaced with a hotel. The same one that I found myself staying just a few days ago. It's the reason I'm writing these incidents out to begin with. It was late when I checked into the hotel, but all I could think about was getting to a bed as fast as possible. If I was focused enough to really look at the lobby, then I'd have gotten the heck out of there. Instead, I just dragged myself to the room, and all but collapsed down onto the too stiff mattress. I was drifting off when a loud bang had me bolting upright. I sat there trying to steady my breathing and looked around the room, trying to listen to anything else. For a while, there was nothing. Then there was this rhythmic knocking. Slow knocks, as though someone was asking permission to be let in. It would be slightly understandable if the sound had come from the door instead of the wall behind me, like the person in the other room was knocking against the wall, knowing that's where the bed was on the other side. My heart leapt into my throat and sweat coated my skin. A curse slipped from my lips as I reached back to pound on the wall. In the deepest voice I could muster, I yelled for whoever it was in the other room to stop. The sound came to a halt and the silence returned. After a few minutes of nothing, I collapsed back down and tried to get back to sleep. No such luck. The knocking started up as soon as my head hit the pillow and continued on throughout the night. I thought about going over there and causing a scene, but I decided to let it go. It was just one night. Not worth the energy. Somehow I drifted off and was awakened by the bright morning sun hitting my eyes, as my exhausted state kept me from closing the blinds. I sat up, and following a groan-filled stretch, I got my things together to check out, more eager than ever to get home and into my own bed. When I got into the hall, though, I stopped, and I found myself looking over to the room beside me. I wanted to see just who was bothering me all night, or to wake them up in the middle of their sleep. I made my way over. It wasn't a room at all, or at least not for the guests. It was the office for the hotel's manager with its door propped open, and one of the managers, an older gentleman with a graying beard, sat at the desk. Startled, I knocked on the door as I eased it open, greeting the man with a confused smile. I didn't know this was an office. I heard a knocking against the wall all night long and I thought there was a kid staying over here, I explained. Just wanted to let you know in case there was something wrong. The man apologized profusely for my experience and offered me a cup of coffee from his private espresso machine, something I couldn't say no to. When I stepped inside, though, eager for the coffee that would put the sludge they usually offered to shame, I froze. My stomach lurched upward, and a pain, more memory than anything real, shot through my leg. Hanging on the wall across from the manager's desk was none other than one of those distorted paintings. This one of a woman, tall and gangly, standing beneath a tree that was entirely too small to be giving off any sort of shade for her. She was smiling, head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, but not toward the painter. Instead, down at a child. A totally normal-looking child. It made her appearance look all the more grotesque. The promise of coffee had left my mind, and without another word, I apologized and ran out of the room. I nearly knocked over a few carts on my way out to the car, fumbling with my keys all the while. They fell to the floor in the lobby, and when I reached down to grab them, I noticed the painting hanging on the wall behind the reception desk. I recognized it instantly. It was the first painting I'd laid eyes on in that forsaken attic. That of a family dressed in Victorian clothing, sitting on a plush couch with a bouquet of flowers in the mother's hand. They all looked mostly normal, save for the mouths that were too wide and the eyes far too black and soulless to be that of a human. I'm surprised that I didn't get pulled over for how far over the speed limit I'd gone to cut my once 2-hour car ride down to a little over an hour. The whole ride home, all I could think about were those pictures and what sort of demented mind it took to create them. What sort of person would want to save them and hang them up in their office as decor for a hotel? I couldn't wrap my head around it, not even as I got home and my wife surprised me with a present. I'm sure you know deep down where this is going. I had to write it down. Get it out there. I can't explain my experience or why these pictures just keep popping up in my life, but I just want it out. I wish I'd never found them in the first place. I wish I'd never climbed that ladder, never investigated the second floor, never went into that house on my own. Because I know now it's a choice that will follow me forever. A choice I will never get away from. I just hope you don't make the same mistake. White Thing in the Mountains, from J. Pratt 0531. So to set this story, which I remember as though it was yesterday, myself and my close group of friends would always race the mountains near our hometown. This particular mountain range being called the Back of the Dragon. We were out one night in my buddy's old beat-up Jeep Cherokee, trying to see who could make it to the top the fastest. We'd all felt kinda weird that night, as though something was off. We had just turned a hairpin corner about a half-mile from the top of the mountain, and were starting the next bend when he slammed on the brakes. As the car came skidding to a stop, we all saw this massive white creature pick itself up beside the guardrail. Just for perspective, in that spot the guardrail is almost 4 feet high. It barely reached the creature's hips. It turned and looked at us with these horribly yellow eyes, teeth bared on its dog-like face. It stood for a moment before jumping off the side of the mountain. Not walk, not fly, it jumped down a 300-foot bank. It disappeared into the night. We continued to drive to the top and sat for a while, just trying to take in what had occurred. Not long after, we heard a bellowing roar coming from the trees behind the Jeep. Luckily for us, that abused little Jeep managed not to stall as we made quite possibly the fastest time we've ever made back down the horrific mountain. We still get nervous on that curve to this day. None of us have been man enough to stop on that curve at night, and very rarely do we take the mountain roads anymore. The last time we did, we saw those same awful yellow eyes glaring from the trees. Watch yourself in the mountains of Southwest Virginia. You're definitely not alone. The following stories are a compilation of experiences submitted by the same viewer. Mine and my brother's dark encounters, from Marshall. Even now, I'm still not sure what the heck me and my brothers encountered. I never thought I would encounter anything paranormal, but it appears that I have. This story involves some encounters my 2 younger brothers and I have had with seemingly paranormal events. My brothers and I have been interested in the paranormal from TV shows we watched, like Ghost Adventures. I, on the other hand, was 50-50 with anything paranormal. I believed in it, but not as much as my brothers. I always thought I could rely on facts and deductive reasoning, but after my own experiences and listening to my brothers tell their own, I now know that there are things in this world that not even facts and deductive reasoning could explain. 1. My first encounter took place when I was in middle school, around the age of 15. It was after school and I was in the school's basement. I had a job of cleaning the bowling alley the school had every Thursday. One of these days, I had been at the bowling alley for about 10 minutes. I was beginning to wash down the top of the bar. I was starting to get thirsty though, so I got a plastic cup from the stack that sat on the bar. I filled it up with water from the sink. As I was close to emptying my drink, I heard a loud clink from the workshop area. This startled me, of course, but seeing that this bowling alley was around 80 years old, my deductive reasoning told me that the noise was one of the machines making some sound, as they tend to do so often. I ignored it, and I tossed my plastic cup in the trash can, continuing to wipe down the bar. 5 minutes later, another loud clink came from the workshop. Now I was starting to get a bit nervous. I thought maybe the manager's down here working in the workshop. When the manager is here in the workshop, you can see bright lights from behind the machines, showing that the lights are turned on. But when I looked at the machine, the lights were off in the workshop. I heard rumors from my friends that our school was haunted, but I never thought anything of it. It was probably some silly story the students made up for fun to scare each other. But at that moment, I was beginning to think otherwise. I wasn't going to be silly and say it was a ghost. I wanted to say it was the manager, because maybe I just didn't notice he had come down here when I arrived. So, to be sure, I called out to him. "Hello? Anyone in there?" No response came back. The more I stared at the machines, the more I began to feel like I was being watched. I called out again. "Hello? Whoever's doing that, I know you're back there. I can hear you." Yet no voice replied, but another loud clink answered. I ducked under the bar, trying to calm myself down, telling myself the sounds were nothing but the machines making noise. But as nervous as I was certain someone was down here with me. But who? And why were they down here after school? I stayed sitting on the floor behind the bar for what seemed like forever. Finally, I mustered up my courage to look over the bar to see if anyone was there. I did so, and I slowly inched my way up to the top of the bar. No one was in the bowling alley. It was just me. I decided to quickly wrap up my job and go home. I did not feel very safe down in the bowling alley, so I did just that, and I left for home. In the following weeks afterward, I was always nervous about going down to the bowling alley. I didn't tell anyone else because I was afraid. Afraid they'd think I was making the whole thing up or that I was a big baby. I did, however, tell my little brothers about the encounter. They think it's a ghost who lurks around the school. Even after that, I still worked down in the bowling alley, and eventually I forgot about the event. I got used to working down there. My second encounter happened not too long ago. It occurred around mid-January this year. My dad's side of the family was hosting a big birthday party at the bowling alley for all the January birthdays my dad's side had. Believe me, there are a lot of birthdays. They included my dad, two of his sisters, my cousin's daughter, and a few family members who sadly moved on. The party ended on a great note and everyone had a good time. I made sure to save some treats for my girlfriend who couldn't make it. My dad, mom, my brothers, and I were locking up the bowling alley and cleaning up. Before we left, my dad asked me to turn off the workshop lights. I went to the workshop and turned off the lights. Immediately, it got pitch black in the workshop. I suddenly began to feel a bad feeling in my stomach, a feeling of pure terror and danger all around me. I felt like someone was watching me. I could feel that there was something bad right behind me, and if I didn't get the heck out of the workshop, I would be doomed. Adrenaline pumped through my body, and I went into high gear. I ran as fast as I could out of the workshop and burst out of the curtain as I made a break for the exit. When I made it to the exit, I made the mistake of looking behind me. Why I didn't keep running was beyond me, though, but I felt like I had to see what I was being threatened by. What I saw, it almost made me scream like a terrified schoolgirl. Behind the curtain, I escaped from this thing. I could immediately tell this thing wasn't human, though it did look like it. It was partially behind the curtains, so I couldn't see it entirely, but I did get a good look at it. I wish I didn't look, though. It was around 4 or 5 feet tall. It had gray skin that had a reflective look to it, and its body structure resembled that of a person. I couldn't see its face, but I could make out what looked like horns on its head. I booked it out of the bowling alley, locked up, and we left. Those were my experiences. Now, these next 2 experiences are from my youngest brother. Let's call him Rocky. 3. This experience of his happened 4 years ago, when he and my mom were down in the bowling alley cleaning, since I wasn't able to clean that day. Rocky was cleaning the bowling lane's approach when he heard a sound in the workshop. He thought that the machines were making noise like they tend to do, so he brushed it off and continued cleaning the approach. 30 seconds later, Rocky heard the sound in the workshop again. This time, Rocky heard it twice. He called Mom and told her where the noises were coming from. Mom said it was probably the machines making noise, just as I had thought. Rocky agreed with what Mom had said, so he continued sweeping the approach. Later, Rocky put the dust mop away and got the dustpan and brush to clean up all the dirt he collected. Just then, Rocky heard the noise again. Being curious, Rocky went into the workshop and turned on the lights. When he did, he didn't see anything bizarre. So once more he shrugged it off and went back to work, but kept the lights on in the workshop just in case. Later, Rocky was changing the score sheets on the metal scoring tables when he saw a shadowy figure move around from within the workshop, from the gap between lanes 2 and 3, where the ball return was located. Rocky went back into the workshop to see what was going on. When he arrived at the black curtain, he started hearing footsteps coming towards him from behind the machines. Rocky went into the workshop, determined to know what was making the noise. When he entered, he caught a glimpse of a dark figure standing at the machine of lane 6. The figure was as black as the curtain, about 4 feet tall, slightly shorter than Rocky. Its hands had long nails and the hands stuck out to the side as it stood perfectly still. Other than that, Rocky could not make out any other details. He then ran out of the workshop and told my mom what he saw. Mom thought he was joking around and didn't pay much mind to his claims. The two of them finished working quickly and went back home. 4. The second encounter Rocky had was with my second brother this past January. We'll call him Trevor. Rocky and Trevor came down to the bowling alley to clean. They had the lights of the workshop turned on while they worked because if anything happened in the workshop, they could catch it immediately. At the end of their cleaning job, Rocky and Trevor were turning off the lights in the bowling alley. When they turned off the lights in the workshop, Rocky and Trevor saw a white ball of light, which the guys on Ghost Adventures would refer to as anomalies. They floated up to the ceiling and then slowly descended back down. Then Rocky and Trevor saw the face of a male. The face looked distorted, as if my brothers were looking at this man's face on a badly rendered, low-quality YouTube video. Since the face was distorted, Rocky and Trevor couldn't make out much detail. The face looked at them and then launched up into the ceiling and vanished. Rocky and Trevor ran out of the bowling alley, locked up the place, and went home. Finally, here are 3 encounters my brother Trevor had. The first he had was when he was in PE class 2 years ago. 5. At the time, the school's gym floor was being sanded down, so PE took place in the basement in the meeting hall. Trevor was in PE in the hall with his class. They were playing a game similar to freeze tag, except when you get frozen, you go into a circle until someone who hasn't been frozen comes and unfreezes you and everyone else in the circle. Trevor had just gotten tagged and he went into the circle. Shortly after arriving in the circle, Trevor's best friend, Drew, got tagged, so he and Trevor sat there together facing a wooden door. When Trevor and Drew were unfrozen, they escaped the circle and made their escape past the wooden door. When they arrived at the door, they heard knocking and footsteps coming from the other side. At first, Trevor and Drew suspected it was the school's janitors doing some cleaning, since the place was really dirty and wasn't the first place the janitors ever cleaned in the school. Since the door had a bunch of small holes on it for ventilation, Drew and Trevor decided to take a look at what was making the racket behind the door. When they looked down through the holes, Drew and Trevor didn't see anything down there, but the lights were on. They suspected the janitors were a lot deeper in the basement than they originally thought, so Trevor and Drew continued on with their game like nothing ever happened. Eventually, the gym teacher said it was time to clean up and go back upstairs since the class would be over soon. There was a hula hoop left behind by the wooden door from another class, so Trevor and Drew decided to go get it. When they arrived at the door where the hula hoop was, Trevor bent down and grabbed it. Before taking off, he decided to get one last look through the holes of the door to see if the janitors were down there. When Trevor looked through the hole, he saw a dark figure standing at the bottom of the staircase. Trevor jumped back in surprise, telling Drew to take a look for himself. Drew did so, and he saw the same thing my brother Trevor saw. Creeped out, Drew picked up the hula hoop, and he and Trevor hightailed it out of the hall with the rest of the class. 6. The second encounter took place a week after the first. Trevor and Drew were having recess at the time, but they were in the boys' bathroom on the second floor of the school doing their business. Drew had just walked out of the bathroom while Trevor was still washing his hands. As he finished up, Trevor grabbed a paper towel from the paper towel dispenser, dried his hands, and tossed it into the trash bin. Above the trash bin was a mirror. So when Trevor happened to look into the mirror after disposing of his used paper towel, he saw the same black figure he and Drew saw a week prior. The figure stood in the corner of the bathroom near the radiator, with its head looking down. After 5 seconds staring at this figure, the figure lifted its head. Trevor was in shock as he stared into its eyes. They were the blackest black eyes he had ever seen. The eyes had tiny red pupils in the center. Aside from those eyes, Trevor couldn't make out anything else, since the rest of the figure was just all black. Trevor turned around to see the figure, but when he did, there was nothing there. No traces of what Trevor had previously seen was there. Confused, Trevor looked back into the mirror. He saw the figure again, but now it was standing right behind him. He could see the color drain from his own face, though, as he stood frozen in place in front of the mirror. Now that the figure was this close to him, Trevor could make out more details. It had a mouth full of sharp, gleaming white teeth, and it was smiling at him. He said it was the creepiest and scariest visual he'd ever seen. He ran out of the bathroom and back to recess where Drew had been waiting for him. 7. The third and final encounter took place 3 months after the second encounter. Neither Drew nor Trevor had seen a trace of the creepy figures since. This encounter took place at Drew's house, where Trevor was spending the night. Around 1 in the morning, Drew and Trevor were playing Halo 4 and Xbox One in the living room. Drew had to go upstairs to use the bathroom, and Trevor was left alone downstairs. When Drew went up the stairs, he warned Trevor about the hunchback creature he'd seen around his house lately. This seemingly came out of nowhere for Trevor. So he was creeped out by this, but at the same time felt as if Drew was trying to mess with him. About a minute later, Trevor started hearing footsteps coming from the kitchen. He had a feeling that Drew might have been telling the truth about this creature, so he decided to go check it out to see what it really was. Coincidentally, there was a flashlight on the dining room table that was approximately 5 feet away. He grabbed it, turned it on, and entered the kitchen. Lo and behold, he saw what appeared to be the shadow of some sort of hunchbacked person. It looked very similar to Quasimodo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It went into the room where Drew kept his dog and a bearded dragon. He followed the shadow into the room, but he no longer saw it, as if it had disappeared. All that was there was the dog sleeping and the bearded dragon that had its eyes glued in Trevor's direction. At that moment, Trevor knew that the bearded dragon was either looking at him or something behind him. He turned around, but luckily he saw nothing there. No more than a second later, Trevor heard a pan hit the floor in the kitchen. He looked into the kitchen and saw this shadow again, looking straight at him. He slowly started to approach the shadow, but the shadow faded away and turned into another anomaly flying into the basement. At that moment, Trevor found Drew looking into the dining room, his mouth gaping open in shock. Trevor asked if he'd seen that, to which Drew replied, "Heck yeah, I did." With that, the two of them went back to the living room and continued to play games to keep their minds off of this situation. Trevor said every time he goes over to Drew's house now, he and Drew are always on high alert for that shadow. Those are all the encounters my brothers and I have experienced recently. From listening to my two brothers' experiences and my own, I know that the paranormal does exist, and it changed my view of the world. There are things in this world we can't explain, and I can't find an explanation for what my brothers and I saw. One thing I can say is that I completely believe in the paranormal now. Be safe out there, everyone, You never know what supernatural danger awaits you until it finds you. Two Paranormal Experiences in Nevada, from Phillip S. This is a collection of weird experiences I had in Nevada. They still creep me out to this day, but talking about them more often helps me get through them. 1. My sister's house. It was spring break of 2014. I was 16 at the time and a junior in high school. I was visiting my sister and her family for the week. She lives in Tonopah with her husband and 3 kids. It's 3 hours north of Las Vegas. Tonopah is a very small town and basically in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by mountains. My sister's house was in a small suburb-like neighborhood, where each house is almost touching each other. The first couple of days went well and without incident, but one night, it was just me in the house. My sister and her husband were on a date at the bar, and the kids were with their biological father. I was still tired from jet lag, so I went to sleep. I texted my sister to see if I could have one of their pistols under the pillow just in case. Being alone way out here, it would make me feel a lot safer. She said it was fine, so I grabbed a Glock. Sure, we were surrounded by neighbors, but I felt more protected, and plus the neighbors weren't home. I put the gun under the pillow. They didn't have an extra room, so I slept on the couch. The way I slept is that I had my back facing the living room and my face against the cushion. There's still a little bit of light outside by then. I was exhausted though, so I didn't care. My sister had a few reptiles, so she had their lamps on at night. So when it gets dark, there would still be some light in the living room. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night to a chill, and I started to smell something strong. It wasn't putrid like rotting meat, but more like cologne. I turned and saw something that made my eyes widen. There was a tall, humanoid black figure, and it was leaning down a few feet away from me, just staring at me. It had no eyes, mouth, or nose, no facial features, not even hair. It looked like someone in a black morph suit. The lamps didn't reflect any light off of it either. I grabbed the pistol and pointed it in its direction, but by then it was already gone somehow. My heart was pounding like I had just survived the worst panic attack. It took me a while to get back to sleep. I didn't see it anymore that week, but I did see these white orbs and a few shadows out of the corner of my eye. From time to time, I still smelled that weird scent. On my last day, I heard Greg talking to someone in his room. I went over and asked who he was talking to, and he said, Mr. Black. I asked who Mr. Black was, but what he answered made me question myself. He said, Mr. Black's a tall, dark man. I don't know his name, so I gave him one. I think I know exactly who he's talking about. Thankfully, they moved to a new house a few years after. Screw that place and Mr. Black. The Mizpah Hotel. The Mizpah Hotel is located in Tonopah, Nevada. If you're a fan of ghost adventures, then you'll know the place since it was featured in a few episodes. I was working as a dishwasher in the restaurant portion of the hotel in the summer of 2017. I was having troubles at home, so I temporarily moved to my sister's new house until things cooled down. On one of the nights, it got busy, and when it closed, there were a ton of dishes left. It was only me and the front desk attendant in the building. I went to the basement and received some towels, and on my way up, I heard a ping sound. I turned around in shock and didn't move. Ping, ping, ping. It sounded exactly like a pickaxe hitting rocks. It stopped as quickly as it came, so I got out of the basement and continued my job. Half an hour later, I went to the plate rack to drop off some plates when something caught my eye at the doorway leading to the restaurant. It was a woman in a red dress. I was paralyzed for the moment, dropping the plates I was carrying, which proceeded to shatter all over the floor. Shaking like I was in the South during the winter, I could see that she was looking into my eyes. She had a face like she wanted to say something but couldn't, or didn't know how. After a few seconds, she disappeared like a mist. I cleaned up the mess and clocked out in a hurry. I was so terrified, I didn't want to stay a second longer. Turns out she's one of the residential ghosts they named the Lady in Red. I ended up losing that job because I didn't finish the dishes that night. I was bummed out, as it was hard enough to find a job in a small town, but I understood. That hotel is really freaky, but an interesting place. Those are my experiences in Nevada, and to this day I'm still in disbelief with these events. I don't think I'll ever forget them. Cursed paintings, ghosts in the desert, and demons in the bowling alley. Man, what other bizarre and creepy stories do you guys have in store for me next? I can't wait to find out. So send those stories right to me at darkstories.org. And I'll just be sitting here, trying not to jump off a bridge instead of doing my taxes. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode of Darkness Prevails, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you've got a story, as I said, send it over to darkstories.org. If you're curious to know which of the stories I read today are my favorite, I absolutely loved the cursed paintings story. The descriptions of the paintings were creepy, and it was unique enough to keep my attention throughout. Anyway, if you want to support the show, check the links in the description. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to support us. Remember, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.